We all know the death panels are controversial under Obama. They exist, they don't exist, they do exist, but they're understandable, supposedly, right? And the system's supposed to make this choice over life and death. And what they're doing is trading off the value of life, which is unquantifiable, and applying it to a cost-benefit analysis in a computer algorithm or an accountant's budgetary ledger.
Or Bill Gates' wet dreams.
And this propagandist, Joe Klein from Time Magazine, he said, here's my parents, they were dying, and I divorced myself from emotions, and I made a rational cost-benefit analysis choice and said, well, my parents were sick, they were elderly, the healthcare system failed, they were going to die anyway, so I decided to be my own death panel and tell doctors to kill my parents instead of spending $250,000 or more saving their lives when they're only going to live a little bit longer. But the problem is it's a slippery slope to even worse things, and if we let society be run this way, there's going to be a lot of evil going on.
Well, and this is what's already happening. So you had this back in 2012, Time, How to Die, and basically they're promoting the cost-saving death agenda. How it's a lot more cost efficient to just pull the feeding tubes out of your dying elderly parents, let them dehydrate and die right in front of you, because that saves money and resources for the system, which is, by the way, built on artificial scarcity, and all of our money that basically exists today is all BS anyways. It's ridiculous. When you start talking about quadrillions of dollars, it's ridiculous to even try and act like that matters anymore, okay? But then you fast forward and we have things like this. If you were anywhere in America in the last month, you've seen this woman because she was splashed all over the media, not only here, but all over the entire world, because she had a brain tumor that was causing her debilitating headaches, so she decided she was going to take her own life.
And suicide is tragic, but it's a reality in life. But the media decided to glorify her decision to commit suicide through the system and basically glamorize the fact that though she had a brain tumor, she's young, otherwise at the prime of her life, and doesn't look old and decrepit and dying like someone who's elderly. And isn't it great that she's affirmed the value of her life by choosing to die? And this is advertised. You gotta expect that whatever you would do in her situation, this is being advertised to the population.
For an agenda. And what do I mean by agenda? Towards the end, she was publicly campaigning for the pro-suicide organization known as Compassion and Choices, which is, by the way, the same group that advocates people voluntarily just stop eating and drinking if you simply feel like you're just done living at all. I'm done. I'm done. I'm not sick or anything. I don't have anything actually wrong with me, but I should probably just stop eating and drinking food because I'm taking up resources. I exist, okay? But then, as you see with things like this, as we move forward in society, as they push this agenda, it starts going down a water slide to hell very fast.
And Richard Dawkins is the famous atheist, and he's argued that genetic screening should be completely standard and probably required for anyone who's pregnant, and that if you were to be diagnosed with having a child in your womb who has Down syndrome, not only that it's okay to choose to abort, not only that you might want to, but that it would be immoral not to, and that if this guy has his say, society would require you to abort a Down syndrome child.
But the thing is it starts with forcing people to take genetic tests for things like Down syndrome and then forcing you to have an abortion for that. They're going to just keep raising the bar. Oh, well, this person looks like at some point in their life they might get cancer. That's going to cost a lot to cure with all those expensive chemotherapy treatments. And since your child has such a high risk, we might as well abort. It would be immoral for you not... it'll just keep getting raised.
And that's absolutely where it's going, and that ends up in a Brave New World Gattaca society where you're genetically engineered, and if you don't have the preferred traits, you're at the very best a second-class citizen.
Who can forget back in 2012 when this paper came out in the Journal of Medical Ethics, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? Let me just read you this abstract really quick. Abortion is largely accepted even for reasons that do not have anything to do with the fetus's health. By showing that 1, both fetuses and newborns do not have the same moral status as actual persons, and 2, the fact that both are potential persons is morally irrelevant, 3, adoption is not always the best interest of the actual people, the authors argue that what we call after-birth abortion, or killing a newborn, should be permissible in all the cases where abortion is, including cases where the newborn is not disabled.
This is disgusting, and it's astounding to me that this existed, even though it was pulled as a white paper. It's shocking enough that a stand-up comedian would make a raunchy joke about this, but a supposed academic from the bioethics department actually published this and put it forward as a policy. And can you imagine if this was adopted by society?
By the way, I had to go back to the Internet Archive machine to even find this because 2 months after it was put up, it was pulled down and it no longer exists. If you just try to go to this page today, it's not there. And as this bar continues to get moved up, now we've seen this, where over in Britain, a court ruled that it was okay for a mother to kill her 12-year-old daughter who had disabilities. Now, this girl did have extreme disabilities. She was blind. She couldn't feed herself by herself. She couldn't talk. But she wasn't on life support. But the mother went to a judge and argued that her quality of life was too low, and so they killed her. And the thing is they didn't just euthanize her. It's not like they just gave her a huge dose of morphine and said goodnight. They pulled her feeding tube and withheld fluids from her, and she slowly died of thirst and starvation. It took this girl 14 days to finally die, okay? And in all of that time, no one ever got any input from the girl, the 12-year-old girl, of whether or not she wanted to kill herself or whether or not she felt her quality of life was too low to continue living. They starved her for 2 weeks and let a 12-year-old girl die who was not on life support. This is where we're headed now, where they're going to start. And it's always cases like this little girl here, where it's a pretty extreme case. She had a lot of disabilities, but that's how they get their foot in the door.
It establishes precedent.
It establishes a precedent so they can continually raise the bar because life is being completely devalued. We are living in a death-centric culture. And we're seeing now that in places like Belgium and the Netherlands, people can be euthanized for all kinds of reasons. Not just severe disabilities anymore, but if you have a mental disability, if you're just lonely, if you're just old and don't have anyone to take care of you, I mean, they'll find reasons and they'll kill people for that. And look at what's going on a national stage here in America. We have it to where a 90-year-old man down in Fort Lauderdale now twice has been arrested for feeding homeless people. Okay? So I guess what our society is saying is we would rather allow homeless people to die starving in the streets than to allow pastors and elderly people with kindness in their heart to feed them. We are devaluing life.
Can I help you, sir?
Feels good.
Yes, sir. Won't you come in?
And your favorite color?
Orange, I guess.
Music?
Classical.
Well, I see that orange is your favorite color.
And this is the plan of Soylent Green, where they want you to give in to your own euthanasia and commit suicide through the system, but they're going to have palliative care. They're going to give you a nice send-off, maybe even with nice music.
No, it won't even be with nice music. They're not even going to ask you what your favorite color is, like in Soylent Green. They're not even going to give a crap about what your favorite music is.
Because that's real personal.
They're going to pull your feeding tubes and let you starve and die over a period of weeks. That sounds real caring, doesn't it? Real loving of the system. While what? In this country we're, $17 trillion in debt? Money is no object to the people who want to spend it on war, all this other bullshit that our government does. But they'll let you die. You know, they definitely can't waste resources on you.
It's not even people who want to kill themselves and be euthanized. It's people who want care. The system is in gear to refuse care to people who want care to stay alive longer.
And this is putting bureaucracies in charge of saying who gets to live and die. This is death panels saying who gets to live and die. And here's the sick, sad part of it. Our society is run by billionaire elitist technocrats, trillionaire elitist technocrats at the very top of things, and probably numbers bigger than that, who have bought and steered all the science.
You know, up to now, I kept thinking that everything science did was good. My training, I suppose. Now I'm not so sure.
And a lot of the meaningful science, the actual cures for things that they've known and have had for decades now, have been suppressed. And they've given you this allopathic medicine chemotherapy thing where they just fill you full of chemicals or rip your organs out. They have better things. It's been on record that stuff's been suppressed. They've known since the 40s, for example, that they can kill viruses, including cancer cells, with frequency waves. They've known it, and they've suppressed every doctor who's ever tried to do it. And now we see stories like this coming out, scientists reversing the aging process in mice, and that human trials are showing promising results. I bet you anything you will see this story once right here, and you'll never see it again. Because the people running things, they don't want... They think the world's overpopulated. They want a lot of people to die. They do not want people to have life-saving technologies. I have said this repeatedly. When it comes to all these life-extending technological advances, that's a small club that most of us are not in. Okay, that is for the people like Bill Gates who pay for the science. And I'm going to get to him in a minute.
And simply put, they're promoting death above life. It's rooted in eugenics, the very philosophy that gave moral permission to the Nazis to go down that horrible slippery slope. But it happened in the UK and America long before that. And it's back in Neo-Eugenics, where bioethicists get to make rational decisions about whose life is worth it.
I mean, that's what this is. This is the same thing Nazis did. They euthanized disabled people. And now we're doing that again. And what I mean by there's a small club and you're not in it, take a look at what Bill Gates, yes, we're down to Bill Gates, going to have to go there. Take a look at what Bill Gates said in this Rolling Stone interview from March earlier this year. The interviewer says, well, there certainly is plenty of frustration with our political system. And Bill Gates says, but I do think in most cases when you get this negative view of the situation, you're forgetting about the innovation that goes on outside of government. Thank God they actually do fund basic research. That's part of the reason the U.S. is so good at things like healthcare. But innovation can actually be your enemy in healthcare if you're not careful. Now listen to this. How's that? The interviewer says. Bill Gates, if you accelerate certain things but aren't careful about whether you want to make those innovations available to everyone, then you're intensifying the cost in such a way that you'll overwhelm all the resources.
Gee, I wonder if they're withholding technology and life-saving cures.
The interviewer says, like million-dollar chemotherapy treatments? Bill Gates says, yeah, or organ transplants for people in their 70s from new artificial organs being grown. There's a lot of medical technology for which, unless you can make judgments about who should buy it, you will have to invade other government functions to find the money. Joint replacement is another example. There are 4 or 5 of these innovations down the pipe that are huge, huge things. And then the interviewer says, yeah, but when people start talking about these issues, we start hearing loaded phrases like death panels and suggestions that government bureaucrats are going to decide when it's time to pull the plug on grandma, which we all know Bill Gates is for.
That's a trade-off society is making because of very, very high medical costs and a lack of willingness to say, you know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers? But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion.
Then Bill Gates says, the idea that there aren't trade-offs is an outrageous thing. Most countries know there are trade-offs, but here we manage to have the notion there aren't any. So that's unfortunate not to have people think, hey, there are finite resources here. And then the interviewer says, let's change the subject and talk about your foundation. Because the interviewer's like, oh my God, you're a creepy, horrifying man, and I just really want to be done with you. This is horrible. This is what he's saying. And look at this. So he's saying, basically, that there are medical technologies. You don't want to make that available to everyone. You don't want to give organ transplants to people in their 70s. Those people are dying anyway. Hey, guess what? Bill Gates probably has a full set of organs floating in tanks somewhere for himself, and then an extra set in case that set doesn't work. Do you think this applies to him, his family, his grandmother, his wife, his kids? It doesn't. It applies to you and your family, your wife, and your kids. Because the people like him who run unofficially basically our country outside of democratic process, like he does with things like Common Core and everything else, they have 2 sets of rules. And he buys all the science with all his bajillions of dollars, okay? And he steers what you see and don't see with that money, okay? To think that people like Bill Gates don't have a tremendous effect on things like who can live and die in this society, you're wrong. He does. He's insane, okay? The people running things, they are all insane. There's a different thing for them than you. So in the meantime, they're trying to sell us how glamorous it is to die young and beautiful, right? That's what they're doing. That's what this is about. Meanwhile, they're moving the bar on who can be killed. And it's going to get so much worse as things go on. I mean, in this article about the mice, they mention in here that people will be able to live healthy lives until they're 90 in a healthy way with this technology that they're working on here. Do you think they want people living healthy lives until they're 90? No, they don't. They want you to start getting sick in your middle ages and then suck all the money out of you through pharmaceutical treatments that don't cure anything and chemotherapy treatments that actually accelerate you dying until you just die, basically. Unless you decide to pull the plug early. Because it's all cost-benefit analysis. It has nothing to do with valuing actual life.
You mentioned it before, but Robert Heinlein said any society that doesn't protect women and children first automatically becomes genocidal. It's a society that's not interested in its continuity and its future, and we are there.
My dad was head of Planned Parenthood. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero, and that's going to be based on the number of people,
the services, the energy, and the CO2 being put out.
That really grabbed me as urgent were issues related to population. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's a trade-off society is making because of very, very high medical costs and a lack of willingness to say, you know, is spending $1 million on that last 3 months of life for that patient, would it be better not to lay off those 10 teachers? Issues related to population. But that's called the death panel, and you're not supposed to have that discussion. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, population, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
My dad was head of Planned Parenthood.
Population.